Once upon a time, in a small, quiet village, there lived a kind man named Thomas with his two children, Anna and Jacob. Their mother had passed away when they were very young, and though their father loved them dearly, he soon remarried a woman named Eliza. At first, Eliza seemed kind and gentle, but once the wedding was over and Thomas was often away working, her true nature was revealed. Eliza was a cold and heartless woman, envious of the love Thomas had for his children. She saw Anna and Jacob as a burden, a reminder of the life their father had shared with another woman. She would often find excuses to punish them, scolding them for the smallest mistakes and forcing them to do all the household chores while she sat idly by. Anna, the older of the two, tried her best to shield her little brother from Eliza's cruelty, but Eliza's hatred only grew. She would deny the children food, sending them to bed hungry while she feasted alone. On cold nights, she would take away their blankets, leaving them shivering while she slept warmly in her grand bed. One winter evening, Eliza's malice reached new heights. She ordered Anna and Jacob to go deep into the forest to gather firewood, knowing that the forest was vast and treacherous. It was rumored that wolves roamed there, and the children were frightened. But Eliza gave them no choice, threatening them with harsher punishments if they didn't obey. As Anna and Jacob ventured into the forest, the wind howled through the trees, and darkness began to fall. They gathered as much wood as they could, but as they tried to find their way back home, they realized they were lost. Tears filled their eyes as they wandered deeper into the forest, calling for each other, but hearing only the eerie silence of the woods. After hours of searching in the cold, they stumbled upon a small cottage hidden among the trees. Inside lived an old woman who welcomed the children with a warm smile. She gave them food, shelter, and listened to their tale of the wicked stepmother. The old woman was kind, but there was something mysterious about her. Unbeknownst to the children, the old woman was a powerful enchantress. She had lived in the forest for many years, watching over the village from afar. Hearing of the stepmother's cruelty, the old woman decided to teach Eliza a lesson she would never forget. The next morning, the enchantress guided Anna and Jacob back home. As they approached the house, they saw their father waiting outside, worried and distraught. He had returned from work to find his children missing and had been searching for them all night. Eliza was furious when she saw the children had survived, but before she could say a word, the enchantress appeared, revealing her true identity. With a wave of her hand, the enchantress cast a spell on Eliza, transforming her into a servant, bound to obey the children she had mistreated for so long. From that day on, Anna and Jacob lived happily with their father, and Eliza, humbled and powerless, served them with kindness. The enchantress disappeared back into the forest, knowing that justice had been served, and peace finally returned to the little family. And so Anna and Jacob learned that no matter how cruel the world may seem, kindness and love will always find a way to triumph over cruelty. Once upon a time, in a quiet village, there lived a widower named Thomas with his two children, Anna and Lucas. Life was peaceful for the small family, until one day Thomas decided to remarry. He met a woman named Clarissa, a beautiful but cold-hearted woman. She was determined to have Thomas's wealth and status, but had no love for his children. At first, Clarissa pretended to be kind and caring, winning over Thomas's heart. But soon after their wedding, her true nature surfaced. Thomas often worked long hours, leaving Anna and Lucas alone with their stepmother, who wasted no time showing her cruelty. Clarissa forced Anna, a young girl of just 12, to clean the entire house from dawn until dusk. Lucas, only 10, was made to do back-breaking work in the fields, even though he was much too young for such labor. While the children toiled, Clarissa would sit in the shade, enjoying luxuries and wearing fine clothes bought with Thomas's money. She fed the children scraps from the meals she prepared for herself and kept the best of everything for her own indulgence. Whenever Thomas returned from work, Clarissa would put on a mask of kindness, acting as though she cared for the children. She would tell him how difficult they were, claiming they disobeyed her and caused trouble. Thomas, tired from his long days, believed her lies, and the children were left to suffer in silence. As months passed, Anna and Lucas grew thinner and weaker. Clarissa's cruelty worsened. She would lock them in their rooms without food, especially if they couldn't complete the impossible tasks she set for them. She even took away their toys and books, telling them they didn't deserve happiness. Anna tried to protect her younger brother, but there was little she could do. One cold winter night, Clarissa's malice reached its peak. She decided that the children were too much of a burden and planned to rid herself of them. She took them deep into the forest under the pretense of gathering firewood. But once they were far enough from home, she abandoned them, leaving them to fend for themselves in the dark, cold wilderness. Lost and scared, Anna held Lucas close as they wandered through the woods, searching for a way back. They were hungry, freezing, and terrified, but they refused to give up. After hours of walking, they stumbled upon a small cottage belonging to an old woman named Martha. She was kind and immediately took them in, offering warmth and food. When Martha heard their story, she promised to help them. Days later, she took the children back to their village and confronted Thomas. Shocked by the condition of his children and the truth that Martha revealed, Thomas finally realized the extent of Clarissa's cruelty. Filled with guilt and anger, he banished Clarissa from his home forever. From that day on, Thomas dedicated himself to caring for Anna and Lucas, making sure they never suffered again. Though the scars of their ordeal remained, the bond between the siblings grew stronger, and they eventually found happiness in their father's love and protection. And as for Clarissa, she wandered from village to village, forever cursed by her wicked deeds, finding no home or rest, a fitting end for her cruelty. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills, lived a young girl named Eliza and her little brother Thomas. They lived in a humble cottage with their father, a kind-hearted man who worked hard to provide for his family. Their mother had passed away when Eliza was just 10, and soon after their father remarried a woman named Agnes. At first, Agnes seemed kind and gentle, but her true nature began to reveal itself shortly after the wedding. She would scold Eliza and Thomas for the smallest of mistakes, but only when their father wasn't around. Whenever he returned from the fields after a long day of work, Agnes would put on a sweet smile and pretend to be the perfect mother. One winter, their father fell ill, bedridden for weeks. It was during this time that Agnes's cruelty escalated. She gave the children little to eat, saving the best food for herself, and forced Eliza to take on all the household chores, no matter how tiring or difficult they were. Thomas, too young to help much, was often sent outside into the cold for hours on end. Eliza would sneak him bits of bread when Agnes wasn't looking, but it was never enough to fill their hungry stomachs. Agnes's heart was cold and selfish. She began to sell their father's belongings for extra money, and even whispered cruel lies into his ear, making him believe that Eliza and Thomas were misbehaving and ungrateful. Their father, too weak to see the truth, grew distant, trusting Agnes's lies. One day, Agnes decided to rid herself of the children entirely. She ordered Eliza to take Thomas deep into the forest under the guise of gathering firewood. Once they were far enough, Agnes left them there, thinking the wild animals or the cold would finish what she had started. Eliza, though terrified, refused to give up. She held Thomas close, and with all her strength, she searched for shelter. After wandering for hours, they found a small abandoned cabin in the woods. They spent the night there, huddled together, praying for their father's recovery and for a way back home. Days passed, and they survived on berries and whatever they could find in the forest. But Eliza's hope never wavered. Finally, one day, as they ventured out of the cabin, they were discovered by a kind old woman who lived on the edge of the forest. She took them in, fed them, and listened to their heartbreaking tale. The old woman, who was wise in the ways of the world, knew what kind of woman Agnes was. She escorted the children back to the village and confronted Agnes in front of the townspeople. Their father, now recovering, was horrified to learn the truth. He cast Agnes out of the house and begged for his children's forgiveness. With Agnes gone, the warmth returned to the cottage. Eliza and Thomas were finally safe and cared for, and their father, full of regret, vowed never to be blinded again by false kindness. From then on, the family rebuilt their lives, stronger and more united than ever, proving that love and resilience could overcome even the darkest of cruelty. Here's a story of stepmother cruelty, inspired by old folk tales, with a modern twist: the silent shadows. In a small village nestled between dark, towering woods and a quiet river, there lived a man named Thomas with his two children, Lily and Sam. Their mother, beloved and kind, had passed away when they were very young, leaving behind a void that could never truly be filled. For a time their life was peaceful, though the sadness of her absence always lingered. One day Thomas married again. His new wife, Margot, seemed kind at first, her beauty and charm captivating the whole village. But the children soon learned that behind Margot's pleasant smile lay a heart as cold as winter. As soon as Thomas left for work each day, Margot's cruelty began. She forbade Lily and Sam from speaking unless spoken to and gave them impossible tasks, scrubbing floors until their hands bled, fetching water from the river miles away, and tending to her extravagant garden. She fed them only scraps, barely enough to survive, while she dined on lavish meals. "If you don't work hard enough, there will be nothing for you," she would say with a smirk. At night, the children slept in the attic, a drafty, cold space that once held forgotten relics of their happy past. Each night they shivered under thin blankets, their stomachs empty, their spirits broken. Margot would lock them in, and they could hear her laughing downstairs, enjoying the warmth of the fireplace. Over time, Margot's cruelty deepened. She began to isolate the children from their father. Whenever Thomas returned from his long days at work, Margot made sure the children were nowhere to be seen. She told him they were misbehaving, lying, or avoiding their chores. "I don't know what to do with them, Thomas. They're ungrateful and lazy," she'd say, while the children cowered behind closed doors. Thomas, exhausted and overwhelmed, started to believe her. He became distant, his love for his children clouded by Margot's lies. He barely looked at them, trusting his new wife's word over the silent, pleading eyes of Lily and Sam. One cold autumn evening, Margot devised her most sinister plan. She told the children to follow her deep into the woods to gather firewood. The trees were twisted, casting long shadows that made the forest feel alive. They ventured farther than they ever had before, the path becoming harder to follow, the trees thicker and more menacing. "We're almost there," Margot said sweetly, leading them deeper until they reached a clearing. Suddenly she turned to them with a dark, menacing smile. "This will be your new home," she whispered, and without another word she turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving the children abandoned and alone. Terrified, Lily and Sam clung to each other, unsure of what to do. Night fell quickly and the cold crept in. They wandered, calling for help, but the woods swallowed their voices. It felt like hours, maybe even days, as they stumbled through the forest, weak and afraid. But just when all hope seemed lost, they found a small, hidden cottage at the edge of the woods. Inside lived an old woman, bent with age, but her eyes were kind. She welcomed them in, fed them, and listened to their story. "I know of Margot," she said darkly. "Many have spoken of her cruelty, but no one dared act. Until now." With the old woman's help, Lily and Sam returned home the next day, stronger and determined. They found their father and told him everything. At first he was angry, refusing to believe that his new wife could be so cruel. But as the children showed him their bruised hands, thin bodies, and the attic where they were locked each night, his heart broke. Confronting Margot, Thomas realized the terrible mistake he had made. In a fit of rage, she tried to defend herself, but the villagers, who had long suspected her cruelty, came forward with stories of their own. Margot, caught and disgraced, fled the village, never to return. Thomas, filled with regret, vowed to never let his children suffer again. Though the wounds of the past took time to heal, the family slowly rebuilt their lives, stronger and closer than before, and the shadows of cruelty that once haunted their home vanished, replaced by love and warmth. This story highlights how cruelty can often be hidden behind charm and lies, but love, resilience, and truth can overcome even the darkest shadows. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a kind and gentle widower named Thomas, along with his two children, Lily and Samuel. Their mother had passed away when they were very young, leaving behind only memories of warmth and love. Thomas did his best to raise them, but the weight of grief and the responsibilities of managing his farm took its toll on him. He eventually remarried, hoping to give his children the motherly love they had lost. His new wife, Eleanor, was beautiful on the outside, but had a heart cold as ice. She pretended to be kind and caring in front of Thomas, but once he was away, her true nature was revealed. Eleanor resented the children. In her mind, they were a burden that came between her and the wealth and comfort she desired. From the moment she stepped into their lives, she made it clear that they were unwanted. Her cruel whispers and spiteful glares were only the beginning. At first, Eleanor's cruelty was subtle. She would serve the children small portions of food while indulging herself, leaving them hungry and weak. If they dared to ask for more, she would scold them harshly, accusing them of being greedy and ungrateful. Over time, she began to assign them impossible chores, sending them out into the fields before sunrise and not allowing them to return until dusk. Lily and Samuel, though only children, were forced to work harder than the farmhands. Thomas, oblivious to Eleanor's cruelty, believed her lies. She would tell him that the children were lazy and disrespectful, causing him to scold them when he returned from long days of work. Lily and Samuel, too frightened to speak up, endured the punishments in silence. As the years passed, Eleanor's malice grew. She forbade the children from entering certain rooms in the house, claiming that they would dirty them with their presence. She tore up Lily's handmade doll and blamed Samuel when he cried over his broken toy. Their childhood, which had once been filled with laughter and love, was now replaced with fear and sorrow. One particularly harsh winter, Eleanor sent Lily and Samuel into the woods to gather firewood. The forest was deep and treacherous, especially in the cold. "Don't come back until you've collected enough," she warned, her eyes gleaming with malice. She knew the children might never return. Lily and Samuel trudged into the forest, their tiny hands frozen from the biting wind. Hours passed and the light began to fade, but they hadn't gathered enough wood. They were lost, cold, and alone. Just as their hope was fading, an old woman appeared. She was dressed in rags but had a kind smile and warm eyes. "What are you children doing here all alone?" she asked gently. The children told her everything about their wicked stepmother and the misery she had inflicted on them. The old woman listened carefully, and when they finished, she nodded slowly. "Fear not, little ones. Kindness and courage will always find a way." She gave them a basket filled with food and a warm blanket, guiding them safely back home. When Eleanor saw them return, she was furious. "How dare you disobey me?" she screeched, but before she could lay a hand on them, a strange thing happened. The old woman appeared in the doorway, her rags transforming into a gown of shimmering light. She was no ordinary woman, but a powerful sorceress who had been watching over the village for years. "You have shown cruelty beyond measure, Eleanor," the sorceress said sternly. "You will no longer have the power to harm these innocent children." With a wave of her hand, Eleanor vanished, never to be seen again. Thomas, realizing the truth about his wife, fell to his knees in sorrow and regret. He apologized to his children and vowed to make amends. With Eleanor gone, peace and warmth returned to the household. The children, though scarred by their stepmother's cruelty, grew strong and kind-hearted, knowing that love and goodness would always triumph in the end. And from that day on, the house was once again filled with laughter, and the bond between Thomas, Lily, and Samuel was stronger than ever. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a kind widower named Thomas with his two children, Lily and Jack. Their mother had passed away years ago, leaving a void in their lives. Though they missed her dearly, they found comfort in their father's love and in each other. Years later, Thomas met a woman named Eliza. She was beautiful, with piercing eyes and an elegant grace, but there was something cold in her demeanor. Nevertheless, Thomas, longing for companionship, married her. From the moment Eliza moved into their home, everything began to change. At first, Eliza treated Lily and Jack with distant politeness, but soon her true nature began to reveal itself. She despised the children for the love Thomas showed them, believing that it took attention away from her. When Thomas was around, she would put on a sweet smile and pretend to be a caring stepmother. But as soon as he left for work, her cruelty knew no bounds. Eliza would make Lily and Jack do endless chores, from dawn till dusk, scrubbing floors, tending to the garden, and cooking meals they were rarely allowed to eat. While they worked, she would sit in the parlor, idly knitting or reading, with a twisted smile on her face. If the children ever dared to complain, she would threaten to tell their father terrible lies about them. One cold winter, Eliza locked the children out of the house while Thomas was away on a business trip. The biting wind howled through the air as they shivered outside, their thin clothes offering little protection from the cold. Huddling together for warmth, they waited for hours until finally a neighbor saw their plight and helped them inside. When Thomas returned, Eliza spun her web of lies, convincing him that the children were unruly and disobedient, which was why she had disciplined them. Though the children tried to tell their father the truth, Thomas, blinded by his love for Eliza, believed her words. The cruelty only escalated. Eliza would withhold food from them, lock them in the attic for days at a time, and constantly belittle them, calling them worthless. Jack, who was younger, often cried in the night, while Lily tried to comfort him, even as her own heart broke. But despite the suffering, Lily and Jack never lost hope. They knew that their mother, though gone, watched over them. One night, after another day of mistreatment, Lily had a dream in which her mother appeared to her. "Be brave, my love," her mother whispered. "Your kindness and strength will protect you. The truth will come to light." With renewed courage, Lily devised a plan. She knew that Eliza was careless when it came to keeping secrets. One evening, when Eliza was speaking to a friend, Lily quietly listened in from the shadows. Eliza boasted about how she had manipulated Thomas and cruelly treated the children without him knowing. Lily carefully recorded every word using an old, hidden recorder her mother had once kept. The next morning, Lily and Jack went to their father with the evidence. They played the recording, and for the first time Thomas heard the venom in Eliza's voice. His heart shattered as the truth unraveled before him. In his fury and sorrow, Thomas confronted Eliza. She tried to lie and manipulate her way out, but the proof was undeniable. Realizing her reign of cruelty had come to an end, Eliza fled the village, never to be seen again. Though the scars of her cruelty remained, Lily and Jack found peace once more. Thomas, filled with regret, worked to rebuild the bond with his children, showering them with the love they had been denied for so long. They knew that while they had endured great pain, their kindness, courage, and the memory of their true mother had saved them from a life of darkness. And from that day forward, the family lived together in love and light, never again allowing cruelty to touch their hearts. Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a kind-hearted man named Thomas with his two children, Clara and Jack. They had lost their mother when the children were very young, and though life was hard, they were happy, filled with love and warmth in their small, cozy home. A few years later, Thomas married a woman named Evelyn. At first, she seemed charming and caring, but once she moved in, her true nature began to show. Evelyn had never wanted children of her own and resented the presence of Clara and Jack in her life. When Thomas was around, she was careful to hide her cruelty behind a false smile, but as soon as he left for work, she would turn cold and harsh. Evelyn would order Clara and Jack to do all the housework, from dawn till dusk. Lazy children don't deserve to rest, she would snap at them, her eyes gleaming with malice. Clara, only 10 years old, scrubbed floors until her hands bled, and Jack, a mere 8, was forced to chop wood far too heavy for his small frame. If they ever dared complain, Evelyn would lock them in the cold, dark cellar with no food. The children grew thin and pale, their clothes tattered and worn. They tried telling their father about Evelyn's cruelty, but she was clever. She would smile sweetly and say, "Oh, they're just children, Thomas." They exaggerate. And Thomas, wanting to believe the best in his new wife, would fall for her lies. One particularly cold winter, Evelyn's cruelty reached new heights. She sent Clara and Jack out into the woods to gather firewood, knowing full well that a terrible storm was coming. The snow began to fall heavily, and soon the children were lost, shivering and hungry. Clara held Jack close, trying to keep him warm as the wind howled through the trees. They wandered for hours, but the storm only grew fiercer. Just when all hope seemed lost, the children stumbled upon a small, abandoned cottage deep in the woods. They huddled inside, grateful for the shelter, but their hearts were heavy with fear and sadness. As the storm raged on, they cried themselves to sleep, unsure if they would ever find their way home again. Back at the house, Thomas had noticed their absence and questioned Evelyn, but she coldly replied, "They must have run away, ungrateful children." Thomas was heartbroken, but deep down he began to suspect something was terribly wrong. Days passed, and still the children did not return. Filled with guilt and worry, Thomas set out into the woods to search for them. After hours of searching, he finally found them, weak and cold in the tiny cottage. Tears streamed down his face as he carried them home, vowing to protect them. When they returned, Thomas confronted Evelyn. For the first time, he saw the hatred in her eyes, the cruelty she had hidden for so long. Furious and heartbroken, he sent her away, never to return. The house that had once been filled with darkness slowly came back to life. Though the scars of Evelyn's cruelty remained, Thomas and his children rebuilt their lives, stronger and closer than ever. No longer did they live in fear, for they had learned that even in the face of cruelty, love and kindness would always prevail. Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled at the edge of a dense forest, there lived a man named Thomas with his two children, Lily and Daniel. Their mother had passed away many years ago, leaving them with their father, who did his best to care for them. Despite the hardships, they were a happy little family, until one day Thomas remarried a woman named Eliza. At first, Eliza seemed kind and caring, but as time passed, her true nature began to surface. She was cold and distant toward Lily and Daniel, finding every opportunity to criticize them. While Thomas worked long hours in the fields, Eliza had free rein to treat the children as she pleased, and her cruelty knew no bounds. She would make them do all the household chores, from dawn until dusk. While Eliza lounged in luxury, wearing fine clothes and enjoying the best food, Lily and Daniel were given only scraps to eat. They often went to bed hungry, exhausted from their endless work. If they ever complained, Eliza would remind them, with a sneer on her face, that they were nothing but burdens to her. The children missed their father terribly, but they were too afraid to tell him about Eliza's cruelty. She was clever and always pretended to be the perfect stepmother when Thomas was around. She would speak kindly to them, offer them treats, and tell Thomas how lucky she felt to be a part of their family. One particularly cold winter, Eliza's cruelty reached new heights. She decided that the children no longer deserved to live in the comfort of the house. She moved them to the barn, where they slept on hay with only thin blankets to keep warm. The bitter cold pierced through their bones, and their once rosy cheeks became pale and sunken. Lily, the elder of the two, tried to remain strong for Daniel. She would wrap him in her arms at night and tell him stories of their mother to keep their spirits up. But even she began to lose hope as the days grew shorter and the nights colder. One evening, when Thomas returned home earlier than usual, he found Lily and Daniel shivering in the barn. Shocked and heartbroken, he demanded an explanation from Eliza. She quickly spun a tale of the children being disobedient and rebellious, claiming she had no choice but to send them to the barn as punishment. But Thomas had seen enough. The truth was written on the children's faces, thin, pale, and tired beyond their years. For the first time, he realized the depth of Eliza's cruelty. Without hesitation, Thomas sent Eliza away, banishing her from their home. He embraced his children, vowing never to let anyone harm them again. From that day forward, Thomas worked hard to rebuild the life they had lost. He showed Lily and Daniel the love and care they had been missing, and slowly their laughter returned. Though the scars of Eliza's cruelty remained, the bond between father and children grew stronger. They found solace in each other, knowing that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together, as a family once more. Once upon a time, in a quiet village, there lived a man named Jacob with his two children, Lily and Thomas. Their mother had passed away when they were very young, leaving them in the care of their loving father. For years, Jacob did his best to raise his children, but as time passed, he grew lonely and decided to marry again. He married a woman named Gertrude, who at first seemed kind and caring. However, once the wedding celebrations were over and Jacob went back to his busy work, Gertrude revealed her true nature. She was a cold, cruel woman who saw Lily and Thomas as burdens and obstacles to her new life. At first, her cruelty was subtle. She would speak to the children harshly and ignore them when they asked for help. But soon it grew worse. Gertrude would give them only scraps of food while she dined on feasts, leaving Lily and Thomas hungry and weak. When Jacob was home, she pretended to be the perfect mother, but the moment he left, her harsh punishments returned. One cold winter, Gertrude sent the children into the woods to gather firewood, knowing there was a fierce storm approaching. "You must not return until you've gathered enough wood for the entire winter," she ordered with a cruel smirk. She gave them no coats or warm clothes, hoping they would never return. Lily and Thomas wandered deep into the forest, shivering from the biting cold. As the storm worsened, they could barely see through the snow. Desperately, they clung to each other, unsure if they would survive the night. Just when they had given up hope, they stumbled upon a small, warm cottage hidden deep in the woods. Inside lived a kind old woman who welcomed them with open arms. She fed them warm soup and gave them blankets to rest by the fire. As they warmed up, they told her their story, and the old woman's eyes grew sad. She knew of Gertrude's wickedness, for she had heard stories of the cruel stepmother from the villagers. The next morning, the old woman gave them a magical necklace that would protect them and led them back to the village. When they returned home, Jacob was relieved and overjoyed to see his children alive. He had no idea what Gertrude had done, but when the children told him everything, Jacob was devastated. Filled with sorrow and anger, Jacob confronted Gertrude. The magical necklace around Lily's neck glowed brightly, and Gertrude's lies were exposed. Unable to hide her cruelty any longer, she fled the village, never to be seen again. With Gertrude gone, Jacob and his children were finally at peace. They continued their lives together, their bond stronger than ever, knowing they had overcome the cruelty of the stepmother who had tried to tear them apart. And so the family lived happily, never to face such cruelty again.